Welcome back, friends. It was another busy weekend of tournaments, but I got all the data here for you. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Just a quick reminder before we get started, we'll do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you like the video, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps push it out there for more people to see. If you really like the video, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you get all my latest videos. And if you're looking for other ways to help support the channel, you can check out my Patreon, patreon.com/warpfriends. Link is in the description below. Any help is greatly appreciated. All right, guys, let's get started. First up is the player numbers for the previous week. So last week, like I said, it was a busy week. We had 1,391 players, bringing the Dataslate total up to 3,531. Games played last week was 7,177, bringing the Dataslate total up to 18,075. We had 21 tournaments, bringing the Dataslate total up to 47. The first chart we're going to look at is the win percentage by armies for the previous week. So just a quick reminder, Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%, so anything in that range will be in green, anything 5% above or below will be in orange, and anything above or below that will be in red. And coming in first place last week was Admech with 60.1%, then we had Sisters of Battle with 58.9%, Deathwatch at 54.9%, Aeldari at 53.8%, and then Thousand Suns at 52.8%. Then down at the bottom we had Drukhari at 35.6%, Ember Shogun at 37.7%, we had Templars at 43%, Imperial Knights at 43.5%, and then Votann at 45.4%. These arrows here, they show the army's performance versus the previous week, so you can get an idea of how each army is moving up and down the charts. So far, the changes for AdMech have really paid off. This week, they've just snuck over that 60% win rate mark. They don't have the highest representation like, say, Knights and Death Guard did when they were dominating, but it's a decent number. We'll get into that a little bit, but overall, the changes have been very positive for AdMech, and they're performing very well. I kind of expected them to fall off after like 1 or 2 weeks, but they're keeping it up so far, so we'll see how it goes for the rest of Dataslate. Same goes for Sisters. They've just been improving as well. I think with Knights falling off, some of these armies are finally able to shine a little bit better. It's really hard to tell last Dataslate how much the domination of Knights and Death Guard was kind of shadowing every other army and kind of keeping them down. So it's nice to see that some new armies are up at the top of the charts here. And then down at the bottom, we have some armies that have been struggling a little bit. Knights, surprisingly, this week down to under 45%. They had a rough go of it. Since the Codex dropped, they haven't been performing that well. So, I mean, I don't think anyone's too heartbroken, but overall, they had a pretty rough week. Really rough week for Emperor Shogun and Drukhari, both under 40%. So there's a couple armies who performed pretty poorly. Drukhari kind of up and down every week. It seems like they either do really good or really bad, and that, it's been that way for a while, but Emperor Shogun has been kind of struggling for a little bit, but I mean, they're only like half an army right now. They don't really have a full range, so it's hard to say. They're kind of lacking in their options, and it's the first time they've been struggling this much, so we'll see what happens. Maybe they'll get a few buffs in the next Dataslate if this continues. Overall, there's a couple outliers for the previous week. Admech and Sisters up pretty high, Drukhari and Emperor Shogun down pretty low, but a lot of armies in the green. It's looking a lot better than it has been, and I think we're starting to get into like a much better space than last Dataslate. I know I'm hearing a lot less complaints. The last few months have been pretty doom and gloom for Knights and Death Guard and Chaos Knights kind of running the show there, and everyone having kind of a rough go of it and kind of getting sick of them. So it is nice to see some variety and some changes happening here. All right, next chart is army representation. This is the percentage of players who play each army. If everyone played every army equally, they'd be about 3.6, 3.7%. So you get an idea of how many players played each army last week. Coming in number 1, we had Aeldari at 8.8%, Space Marines at 6.8%, World Leaders at 6%, Death Guard at 5.2%, and then Tyranids at 4.9%. And then down at the bottom, we had Agents at 0.5%, Deathwatch at 1.3%, Drukhari at 1.4%, Gene Stealers at 1.6%, and Thousand Suns at 1.7%. So Aeldari jumped to the top of the charts here at 8.8%, kind of reminiscent of Death Guard last Dataslate, but they've been performing okay. They haven't really been dominating or anything, but I noticed this week a lot of players did bring them, it seemed, to LVO, and they have been winning a decent amount of tournaments, so you could see a few more players jump to them. They're a pretty skilled army, and if you know what you're doing, you can get some good results. They are one of the faction focuses this week, so we'll get a little bit deeper dive on how they're getting their wins and how they're doing. Space Marines are always a popular army, and they did get some new detachments, and the Shadowmark detachment has performing pretty well, so that will definitely bring some players back. World Leaders continues being up near the top of the chart since the Dataslate. Death Guard is still up there. They dropped quite a bit compared to what they were, but they're still getting tons of players right now. Tau and Orcs both getting a pretty good jump in players, both being over the average representation right now. Orcs have been performing better than they were last Dataslate. They're not top of the charts or anything, but they're performing okay, which is, I think, enough to bring some players back. And same for Tau. They've been getting some pretty good results, so good to see the representation up a little bit higher. It has been down for quite a while. And down at the bottom there, Agents had 0.5, so there's actually a decent amount of agent players last week. I think we had like 7 or 8 total, which wasn't too bad. Deathwatch, Drukhari, they're always down near the bottom. And then you have Thousand Suns. It was a steep drop off for them since the Dataslate drop, and they're down under 2%. So it's not surprising. I think the Thousand Suns players kind of, like I said before, are fed up with the changes. So it's not surprising to see a little bit of abandonment there. Overall, this chart, I always say it is always going to be imbalanced based on popularity / performance, but the chart is looking better than it has been. There's a large amount of armies in the 2.5 to 5% range, and that's pretty good. We're never going to see a perfectly balanced representation. So, overall, besides the one little outlier of Aeldari, I think it's looking pretty good. All right, next up is the combined stats for previous weeks. So this is Army win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. Just a quick reminder, XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players who went undefeated or only one loss at a tournament last week. So, example 5-0 or 4-1. It's not a perfect stat, but it's kind of a good way to compare to the win percentage to see how an army did for the week. A higher XOX1 percentage means you're more likely going to see those armies at the top tables and a better chance to win tournament. And a lower XOX1, less likely and probably sitting around mid to bottom boards there. So coming in number 1, we had AdMech, and then we had Sisters of Battle, Deathwatch, Aeldari, and Space Marines. And then down at the bottom, we had Emperor's Children, Drukhari, Agents, Imperial Knights, and Black Templars. So, as I mentioned, AdMech's performing pretty well, and they kind of backed that up with a almost 26% XOX1, so well above the average. So lots of AdMech players are, performing very well at tournaments, getting to those top tables. They have won quite a few tournaments, I think at least one every week, which is surprising for AdMech. It's been a long time since we've seen them do that good, so not surprising to see them at the top of the charts here. Same goes with Sisters and Deathwatch. While Deathwatch didn't have as many players, they did have very good XOX1, and same for Sisters. Almost 60% win rate and an over 21% XOX1. So 3 armies there who performed very well. And it's one of the few times that we have armies at the top who are under 3% representation, because they performed so well, the players that did show up, that actually catapulted them over the armies like Aeldari, who had almost a 9% representation, which would normally jump them up the charts to number 1 pretty easily, but they had a pretty substandard XOX1 with only 13%. It's just below the average, but considering their win percentage, you would expect to see that a little bit higher. And down at the bottom, you can see Imperial Knights had a pretty steep drop off week over week. Seems to be getting a little bit worse. Their win percentage was just under 44%. They only had a 5% XOX1, and despite their 4.1% representation, it's one of the few times we've seen an army down that far with a representation that high. Normally they have enough results everywhere else to sort of pull them back up into the middle, but they struggled a lot last week and performed pretty poorly. Another interesting one there is Thousand Suns. While they did have a 53% win rate, they only had a 4% XOX1. So while they did get a good amount of wins, it was all kind of in the mid boards there. They kind of had a lot of people going 3-2, 2-3 at tournaments. They didn't really have anyone getting to those top tables. 4% XOX1 was kind of surprising. They're still good enough to get some wins. Right now, it doesn't look like they have the ability to get to those top tables or win many tournaments with a 4.3% XOX1. And the same can be said for Death Guard, 49% win rate, only a 5.5% XOX1. But they did have a 5% representation. So lots of players there, but they're just kind of living the mid-board, 3-2, 2-3 kind of results. Very few players are getting to those top tables. This chart looks okay. There is some weird results this week. Armies at the top that you wouldn't expect to see at the top based off of the representation, but they performed really well. Then we have some armies at the bottom that you kind of don't expect to see down there, like Imperial Knights and Death Guard. And even Thousand Suns. You look at the win percentage, you'd expect to see them higher up, but they struggled overall to find any sustained success at tournaments, and it dragged them down the charts there. Week over week, these charts can be a little bit skewed and get some funny results, and this one is one of those weeks. I think it's a little bit surprising. We haven't seen one that kind of shaped out like this in a while, so every week's different, and that's why we look at the data. All right, next up is the tournament wins for each army last week. So coming in number 1, we had Space Marines and Chaos Demons with 3. Tau, Votann, and Aeldari had 2. And then we had War Leaders, Space Wolves, Necrons, Gene Sealers, Chaos Space Marines, Chaos Knights, Blood Angels, Asher Militarum, and AdMech all with 1. So it was kind of a nice variety of winners this week. We had a few at the top with 3, but we had a nice spattering of armies there, picking up some wins. But a big difference since the Dataslate dropped. Last Dataslate, we would have seen Death Guard and Knights probably with 6 or 7 wins each, and everyone else with hardly any. So it's nice to see there's a lot of different armies getting wins out there. So it's always better for the meta if the wins are being spread around. All right, next up is the tournament wins for each sub-faction. This kind of breaks down how each army is getting their wins just to get a better idea. So looking at the top there, for Votann, Needgaard picked up both their wins. For Demons, it was Demonic Incursion and Plague Legion. And then we had Aeldari had Warhost and Aspect Host both got a win. And for Space Marines, we had Stormlance picked up 2, and then Shadowmark Talon actually picked up 1. All right, next up is the win percentage by armies for the current data slate. So this is the last 3 weeks of data here. Just a quick reminder again that the Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%. So anything in that range will be in green. So coming in number 1 so far for the data slate is AdMech at 57.7%. Sisters at 55.5, then we have Deathwatch at 54.7, Grey Knights at 53.9, and then Aeldari at 52.5. And then down the bottom we have Agents at 42.6, Tyranids at 44.2, Orcs at 45.6, Space Marines at 45.7, and Space Wolves at 45.7. Sisters and AdMech remain on top. It's another successful week for them, and I think everyone's kind of expecting the sort of floor to follow to AdMech here and for them to sort of come back down to earth, maybe not down to the bottom of the charts, but, you know, at least into the middle there. But so far, they're maintaining their good win percentage. It's good to see. Nice to see some new armies at the top there. Despite their poor results this week, Grey Knights still up near the top, so, you know, a little bit of a dip, but they stocked up enough wins in the first couple weeks that it kept them up there. So down at the bottom there, we have 3 really popular armies, Space Marines, Orcs, and Tyranids, who are all kind of struggling this data slate. Tyranids especially have just dipped up below 45%. It's been a while since we've seen them down that low. And Orcs are actually up a little bit better than they were last data slate, but just teetering on that range there. You know, it's funny how fast things can change in this game. You know, data slate drops, and then we have those armies who are sort of running the show, sitting down around, you know, Death Guard's at 50%, Imperial Knights are down 46%, Chaos Knights are 47%. And now we have armies who have been perpetually down at the bottom of the charts, like AdMech and Deathwatch mostly, then Grey Knights, and they're back up at the top. So it is nice to see that some change can happen. I think everyone was desperately waiting for that to happen, and now that it's here, you don't want to see an army up around 58% like AdMech, but I think we can excuse it for a few weeks. They definitely deserve it, and I'm sure things are going to balance out a little bit better, but right now it's actually a fairly balanced meta. There's a lot of green on this table. Just a couple people at the top and the bottom who are struggling a little bit and succeeding a little bit more than the others. But overall, we're in a pretty good spot right now. All right, next up is the army representation for the current data slate. So again, the last 3 weeks of data here. So another quick reminder that the average representation is about 3.6, 3.7%. So you can get an idea of how many players are playing each army. So coming in number 1 for the data slate, we have Aeldari at 7%, Space Marines at 6.3, World Leaders at 6.2, Death Guard at 5.5, and Necrons at 4.7. Then down the bottom, we have Agents at 0.5, Deathwatch at 1, Genestealers at 1.4, Drukhari at 2, and Thousand Sons at 2.2. So Aeldari jumps up to number 1 after a very strong week of like almost 9%. So they're sitting at 7% for their data slate here. Space Marines and World Leaders both maintaining roughly where they are. You know, there's a few strong armies up at the top, but overall it's not too crazy. And even down the bottom, we only have 3 armies below the 2% range, and one of those is Agents, which is always going to be down there. So we only have 2 armies down there. So it's actually a pretty balanced representation overall. You have armies that struggled a lot last data slate to get any amount of players, like Black Templars, Orcs, and Tau, and they're back up to the average or above the average. So a lot of those players who filtered out of Imperial Knights, Death Guard, filtered back down in some of these armies who were struggling to get some players. And, you know, Space Marines, Aeldari, Death Guard, World Leaders, Necrons, Custodies, they're always going to be up near the top anyways because they're just very popular armies to play. And Aeldari's been winning some tournaments, so it's not surprising to see them up near the top as well. But I think we're in a pretty good spot right now. We'll see how it shapes up after the next couple weeks, but we're starting to get like a decent amount of data in, and it's looking pretty good. All right, next up is the combined stats for the previous week. So again, it's Army win rates, XOX1 percentage representation, and XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players who went undefeated or only won last of the tournament, so 5-0 or 4-1 as an example. Again, not a perfect stat, but a good way to compare it to the win rate to see how an army did. The higher the XOX1, the more likely you're going to see an army at the top tables and better chance to win a tournament. Coming in number 1, we got Deathwatch. Then we have Sisters of Battle, Aeldari, AdMech, and then Grey Knights. And down at the bottom, we have Agents, Thousand Sons, Tyranids, Imperial Knights, and Emperor's Children. Overall, the chart looks pretty good. There's not too many outliers. There's only a few armies down below 10% XOX1. You had Knights, Tyranids, and Thousand Sons. They're the only ones with, you know, any amount of representation that is down below the 10% mark. And there's only a few armies above 20%. You're looking at Sisters of Battle and Deathwatch right now. So this is actually one of those times where this is really balanced meta from at least the data so far. I can't speak to how it feels when you're at a tournament. I'm sure there's still some impressive armies to play against. So if there's any people out there who've been to tournaments, how's it feeling? Is there a new boogeyman out there like Death Guard and Knights that everyone dreads playing? Or do tournaments feel a little bit better than they did in the last few months, where you feel like you might see some new armies and have a chance to win? Let me know what you guys think, and let me know how you guys feel about it. And overall, I'm pretty happy with how things are looking. All right, next up is the Army Tournament wins for the current data slate. It is broken down week over week, so each week it is a different color, so it just kind of gives an idea of when and how each army is getting their wins. Coming in number 1, we have Aeldari with 6, and in second place we have Space Marines, Demons, and AdMech all with 4. Then we have a few armies with 3, a few armies with 2, and then several armies with 1. We still have a few armies that don't have any wins, but we're only 3 weeks in. It's only been 40 tournaments, which is not a lot in the grand scheme of things. So hopefully as some more tournaments pile in, we'll get some of those armies picking up some wins. I think overall, though, this chart looks a lot better than it did last data slate, like all charts have, now that everything's a little bit more balanced. We still have Aeldari leading the way with 6, but it's only 2 up on the second place. There's 3 people in second, compared to what Death Guard was last, almost double for the entire data slate. They're at least double second place. And overall, it looks like a lot more armies are getting wins. And that's what you want to see. You want to see a large variety. It's much healthier for the meta. It's much healthier for the game if the wins are being spread around between different armies. All right, and the first faction focus this week is Aeldari. So taking a look at the last 8 weeks results here, we can see their average representation is kind of maintaining anywhere from like 5 to, it jumped up really high this week to almost 9%, but they've been anywhere from like 4.5% to 6%, and their win percentage has been anywhere from about 50 to 55%. So they're in a very healthy spot. They're getting lots of players, and they're getting average to above average results in win percentage every week. So I don't think there's anything too much to complain about here for Aeldari. And looking at their stats versus the meta average, you can see that generally speaking, they're above the average all across the board. Win percentage is 52.5 versus 49, so above there. Their army representation is about double the average, so you'd like to see that come down a little bit, but they are popular armies, so they're always going to have more players. Their XOX1 is above average at 18 to 14.7, but not crazy high, still pretty good there. And they've got 6 tournament wins versus the average of about 1.7 to 2 for every other army. And for the tournament wins, they're about 6 to the average of about 1.7. So again, they've been winning a little bit more tournaments than anyone else, but overall, their numbers are actually pretty good. They're performing well. They're not performing like too well above the average. So everything is still right around where you want it to be. Looking at their sub-faction player counts there, you can get an idea of how many players are playing each detachment. Aspect Host, the clear favorite here, 60% of the players. Warhost is picking up the second most amount with 26, and then the last remaining like 20% or 15% there is made up between all the other detachments. So there's really not too much to speak of there. It's kind of spread over 5 detachments. You look at their win percentage for the current data slate for all the detachments there. Warhost is actually performing the best with 58%. And Aspect Host, they do have a majority of the players, and they're sitting at 53%. So again, both the most popular detachments are performing the best, not surprising there. And all the other ones who have very few players are performing below like 50%. So not surprising to see them down that low. If they were getting better results, they'd probably see some more players, especially something like Devoted of Need, who was the dominant sub-faction for them for a long time and was picking up almost all their wins, and now it's down around 40%, and there's hardly anyone playing it. So just goes to show that people will gravitate towards whatever detachment will give them the best chance to win. But I think everyone already knew that anyways. And looking at the sub-faction tournament wins, you can see Warhost has 3 and Aspect Host has 3. So it's kind of spread between those two detachments there. Overall, Aeldari's in an okay spot. They're performing a little bit better than the average. They're one of the top armies right now based on the numbers, but they're not dominating in a way that feels oppressive. They are winning more tournaments than everyone else, but it's hard to say. They have a ton of players, and we'll have to see how it shapes out. They've won a bunch in the first week, and that kind of propelled them up to the top. So if everything keeps playing out the way it is going, even if they do finish at number 1, it won't be by a crazy margin. So it's in a pretty good spot. I think for this being one of the more dominating armies in the meta right now, I think we're in a pretty healthy spot. The next faction focus is Leagues of Votann. Looking at the last 8 weeks of results here, you can see when the codex dropped around the start of September that their Army representation jumped from about 1.5 to 2% all the way up to just over 3, and they've been right around there pretty much steady. Last couple of weeks, they dipped down just a little bit as some new armies getting some codexes, and as things are changing, people are, stop playing them a little bit. But overall, their win percentage has been anywhere from like 46, 47 to 53, 54%. So it's a little bit of a swing each week, but the average is sticking right around 50%, which is what you want to see. And then we look at the stats versus the meta average there. You can kind of get a good idea. They're in an actually very healthy spot. Win percentage is almost bang on the average, 49 versus 48.9, so almost perfect there. Army representation is a little bit below average. They're not probably going to be one of those armies that is up around the average unless they are performing very, very well. Then we'll see some more players. But 3% versus 3.6, that's very good for Votann. XOX1 is just slightly above the average at 15.8 versus 14.7. So again, right bang on, and that's what you want to see. And then Army Tournament wins, they have 3 versus 1.7, so a little bit above there, but nothing to be concerned about there. Looking at the sub-faction player numbers here, we can see that Needgaard is, again, the most dominant sub-faction, over 61% of the players. And then coming in second place is the Brandfast at 18.8, so just about 19%. And then we have Delve Assault at about 8 and Hearthband at about 10. And looking at their win percentages there, you can see Needgaard's about 48% win rate, Brandfast about 49.6%, Hearthband's 51.2, and then Delve Assault is at 49.9. So despite the majority of players playing Needgaard, all the sub-factions are actually performing right around the same win percentage. So overall, it looks like Votann is in a very healthy spot. Not sexy numbers, they're not dominating anywhere, but they're right where you want to be. Looking at their meta health rating, it's 103 to 100. So 100 being like a perfectly average army, they're at 103, which is almost perfectly average. And if everyone was right around where Votann is right now, I think we'd be in a much better place. If there's any Votann players out there, let me know how you guys feel. How's the new codex been feeling for you? How those new units that came out, you having some fun with them? How do you expect Votann to sort of pan out over the rest of the data slate as Votann players? You guys will be able to give me a much more clearer insight into how the army's doing than sort of what I can read or check out around online. Before I forget there, the sub-faction tournament wins. Needgaard has picked up 2 and Brandfast picked up 1. All right, and that's it for this week, guys. Thanks for watching. Big shout out to my Patreon members, Meet the Great, John Gurman, William Viz, and Stayak, and my YouTube channel members, Andrew Stone. This does take me a little bit longer each week to get together because I have to manually import all the data myself, so all your guys' support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Good luck in the tournaments coming up this weekend, and we'll see you next week.